As we approach holiday parties and dinners, I think we could all use a little brush up on our manners. Remember how we navigated the holidays last year with small groups and virtual dinners? This year, holiday celebrations could be closer to normal, but in some ways they could be a little more complicated, a little awkward for families and groups that have to think about people's different health choices. Elaine Swann is the founder of the Swann School of Protocol. She has advice for helping everyone feel comfortable and have a good time. Elaine joins us now from her home in San Diego, California. Good to see you, Elaine. We're going to start with a question I think that begs to be asked before any gathering these days. Is there a polite way to ask about someone's vaccine status?
There certainly is a polite way to ask about someone's vaccine status. Normally, we would not dive into people's health issues, but because of the current pandemic that we're still kind of working through, this is something that's absolutely acceptable. And so the best way to ask a person is to ask them in a way that is non-confrontational. So you can ask them by saying, how do you feel about the vaccine, or what are your thoughts on the vaccine? This way they can really feel free to share their thoughts with you, and that will let you know whether or not they're vaccinated. If you're inviting someone to your event, then this is where you're very direct to say, have you taken the vaccine? Yes or no. And my recommendation is to do that before you actually invite them. So this way you're not having to uninvite them after you learn their status.
Ooh, that's a good point. As a host, how do you set the health and safety guidelines for your party? How do you let your guests know what they should be expecting? Is that something that you put as an addendum in the invite or the evite?
You let your guests know the guidelines before they even get there. So now our invitations are going to look like date, time, location, and here's how we'll be handling things. And this is where you let folks know whether or not you're requesting them to be tested in advance, or you're only having folks that are fully vaxxed, or maybe you are going to have an event and people are not going to practice any social distancing. It'll be free flowing. There'll be no mask. Whatever the standard is for your event, put it in the invitation so that this way people have the opportunity to make a decision for themselves as to whether or not they're going to attend.
That's good. So be upfront, be transparent, and do it as far in advance as possible. This year, I'm thinking we're going to have a hybrid. We're going to see maybe in-person events and virtual events, people kind of mixing it up. How do you help everyone feel included if they're maybe not there physically?
If people are not there physically, the thing that I say that you should do as a perfect host is to make sure that you have a beginning, a middle, and an end for your celebrations. They can take part in the festivities. They know exactly what's going to happen. They know when it's going to start and when they can go ahead and log off. And keep in mind, the folks that are joining virtually, you can't keep folks online for hours on end, so be sensitive to that. So have all of your things set in stone so that there's a nice flow in terms of your timeline.
I've never really thought about scheduling a party like that, but it makes perfect sense, especially if you have a little virtual component. Really quickly, I do want to ask this question because what if you set your guidelines, you have expectations either as a host or as a guest, and you get there and that's not what's happening? Like maybe you said everyone's going to be wearing masks indoors and then they're actually not. How do you handle a situation like that?
Certainly, as the host, you have all full authority to tell people, look now, wait a second, folks, listen, we're all trying to gather. Let's all make sure that we're following the guidelines at the party. Now, for the individual who's attending and you start looking around and you see that people are not following what you expected, go to the host privately and ask them, I noticed that people aren't necessarily following the guidelines that you set forth. How do you feel about that? Or is that okay with you? And let them answer. And if they answer by saying, you know what, it's okay, I don't mind people doing it, I think we're all going to be okay, then that's when you can make your decision to say, you know what, I'm just going to wait a little bit of time and then I'm going to slide on out. And the best way to get out of that moment is to look around and once you've made that decision, just go to the host and say, I thought I was going to be able to stay a little bit longer, but I'm going to go ahead and head on out now. This is not the time for you to lecture that person. Yeah. You shouldn't lecture that person and go into detail as to why. Just bow out gracefully and pack your stuff and leave.
I love it. Great tips, Elaine Swann. I see why you have your own school of etiquette. Those were great takeaways for us. Thanks so much. Great to see you.